It was one of the coldest winter nights of 1692. The moonlight cast a trembling glow over the snow-covered fields. In the distance, the candlelight, seeping from a small farmhouse window, suddenly went out. Then, a piercing scream shattered the silence. A young girl's scream. At that moment, the stillness hanging over the village broke apart. A group of villagers, holding lanterns, ran toward the door of that house. Inside, chaos. Reverend Samuel Parris's 9-year-old daughter, Betty, had fallen to the ground, writhing in pain. His niece, Abigail Williams, was pressed against the wall, eyes wide with terror as she stared at Betty. The little girl's arms were twisted, as if pulled by invisible hands. Unintelligible words spilled from her mouth. The neighbors who rushed inside stood frozen. Betty's mother trembled as she tried to hold her daughter's convulsing body. Someone cried, "What's happening? For God's sake!" The fire in the hearth cast dancing shadows on the wall. Shadows that looked like witches. Reverend Parris, pale and shocked, leaned over to restrain his daughter's wildly flailing hands. He whispered prayers. "Lord, help us. Drive out the devil." Betty's eyes rolled white, her body convulsed, and then suddenly went limp. A dreadful silence filled the room. Only the sound of everyone's breathing could be heard, their breaths turning to mist in the cold air. The next day, Betty still had not recovered. That same day, news spread from another house. 11-year-old Abigail Williams had begun suffering similar fits. She screamed as if an unseen hand was pulling her by the hair, crying into the void. "It hurts! Let me go, please! It hurts!" No one in Salem had ever seen anything like this. The forest surrounding the village seemed to come alive as a nightmare. The darkness whispered of evil behind the trees. Whisper spread from house to house. "They are bewitched. The girls must be bewitched." Desperate, Reverend Parris summoned a doctor. Dr. William Griggs examined the girls. He found no fever, no sign of disease. Finally, he gave an unprecedented diagnosis. "This is witchcraft. The devil's work." His words sent an icy wind through the room. Faces went pale. A single word from the doctor's mouth planted an ancient nightmare into Salem's sleep. Witch. From that moment, nothing in the small village of Salem would ever be the same. A spark had been lit. Fear spread through the streets like a heavy fog. When Betty regained consciousness at the Parris home, she began telling strange stories. Abigail's tongue loosened as well. She spoke of dark shapes circling their beds, of invisible creatures pinching her skin. The people around listened in horror. Parris asked again, "Are you sure? Who did you see? Tell me, whose spirit torments you?" At first, the girls said nothing. Perhaps they were afraid, or simply hadn't decided whom to blame. But as the pressure on them grew, names began to spill out. Tituba, Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne. Everyone in the room exchanged uneasy glances. These 3 names belonged to women already infamous in Salem. Tituba, the dark-skinned enslaved woman working in Parris's house. Sarah Good, a beggar who wandered the streets muttering curses. And Sarah Osborne, an old woman who rarely attended church, who had scandalized the village by marrying her young servant. The girls' choices revealed the prejudices of their community. Tituba, with her foreign stories and different skin, had always frightened people. Sarah Good begged door to door, and when refused, she muttered curses. Children feared her, adults despised her. Sarah Osborne, who had stopped going to church, was branded immoral and selfish. In other words, Betty and Abigail named those who fit the image of a witch in their minds. When the villagers heard these names, everything seemed to click into place. Yes, it must be them. The three women, already outcasts, were now blamed for all of Salem's suffering. The interrogations began. Under pressure, Tituba broke. She told a story of a tall man in black, a book with many names, a pact with the devil. Gasps filled the room. He brought Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne to me. We are all servants of the devil. The story sent the crowd into hysteria. The first domino had fallen. With Tituba's confession, the fear of Satan's conspiracy took root in every heart. Even Reverend Passer wept aloud. "Lord, have mercy on us." Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne were questioned next, but they denied the accusations. Sarah Good, pregnant and exhausted, kept repeating, "I did nothing. For God's sake, believe me." Yet every time one of the girls fell to the floor screaming, her words were drowned out. Sarah Osborne's proud defiance was taken as diabolical arrogance. No one believed in their innocence. They were others, and now marked by the devil. When the hearings ended, all three women were thrown into cells. The village lay under a dark spell. No one could sleep. The colony's authorities were finally notified. Witches were loose in Salem. By late March 1692, hysteria consumed the village. More girls began showing the same symptoms. 12-year-old Ann Putnam Jr., 17-year-old Elizabeth Hubbard. The list grew longer each day. They screamed, they saw visions, they thrashed as if possessed. Salem had become a theatre where young women's bodies performed a strange and terrible drama. Names multiplied daily. Accusations spread like wildfire. Neighbors whispered, "He's part of it too." On March 23, 1692, something unthinkable happened. Martha Corey, one of the most respected women in Salem, was accused of witchcraft. She had spoken out against believing the girls' stories. Now, her skepticism made her a target. When she was arrested, her husband Giles Corey shouted, "My wife's heart is pure. Do you know what you're doing?" His protest was in vain. Soon, he too would be accused. Another shock followed. 71-year-old Rebecca Nurse, a gentle grandmother loved by all, was chained as a witch. The villagers were stunned. If Rebecca Nurse is a witch, then God help us all. Even Satan can deceive the righteous, others answered coldly. No one was safe anymore. By May, over 100 people had been accused. The chaos grew too large for the village to handle. Massachusetts Governor William Phips intervened, ordering a special court, the Oyer and Terminer, to hear and decide. The court would convene in Salem town, a few kilometers away, with a proper jail and courthouse. Governor Phips appointed his deputy, William Stoughton, a fanatical Puritan determined to finish the devil's work as chief judge. Among the panel were notable men like Samuel Sewell. The mission was clear: to swiftly try and punish those accused of witchcraft. The first session began in June 1692. Inside the stifling courthouse, the heat came not from the summer sun, but from fear and zeal. The spectators, the trembling defendants, the stern judges. It was a theatre, but no one dared say so. The first trial was that of Bridget Bishop, a middle-aged woman known for her independent manners and bright clothing.
"My apples rotted because of her. I saw her shadow at midnight. It vanished before my eyes. My child cried after passing her house. She cursed him." Bridget denied everything, bewildered. But then, Abigail Williams, sitting among the girls, began mimicking Bridget's words, screaming them back, as if possessed by her spirit. The crowd gasped. Judge Stoughton slammed his cane. "Enough! The signs of guilt are clear!" The jury deliberated for only minutes. Bridget Bishop was found guilty. 8 days later, on June 10th, 1692, Bridget Bishop was hanged. The crowd stood in tense silence. 8 days later, on June 10th, 1692, Bridget Bishop was hanged. The crowd stood in tense silence. As the rope was placed around her neck, she cried, "I am innocent. For God's sake, I am innocent." The executioner kicked the stool. Her body swung. Salem's sky echoed with cries and lamentations. Her death fanned the flames. The witch hunt had truly begun. In July, Rebecca Nurse, Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Howe, and Sarah Wilds were hanged. Rebecca sang hymns until her final breath. Some in the crowd murmured, "She's a saint. We're making a mistake." But Cotton Mather, the famous Boston minister, rode up on horseback shouting, "Do not stop. Even the devil can recite the Lord's Prayer." His words extinguished the last trace of mercy. They were executed swiftly. Sarah Good's final words were venomous. When the minister cried, "Confess, Good, save your soul," she spat back, "I am innocent. You are the liar here." And as the trap door fell, she hissed, "I am with God. You look to yourselves." In August, John Proctor, George Burroughs, John Willard, Martha Carrier, and George Jacobs Sr. were hanged. The most shocking was George Burroughs, a former minister of Salem Village. Captured in Maine and brought back, he too was accused. On the gallows, he recited the Lord's Prayer perfectly, something a witch was said to be incapable of. The crowd wavered. He must be innocent, but Cotton Mather again intervened. "Satan can disguise himself as an angel. Do not be deceived." The trapdoor opened. Burroughs died. His unburied body lay in the dirt until a few brave souls buried him at night. By September, the jails overflowed. Over 150 prisoners awaited trial. The damp stone cells were filled with chains, hunger, and disease. Sarah Osborne had already died in custody. Time stood still. Almost everyone brought before the court was found guilty. Yet, those who confessed and named others were spared, for the moment. Lies became a survival strategy. Mary Warren, once an accuser, confessed that they had all been pretending, and was instantly accused herself, forced to recant, then to accuse others. In Salem, truth had no value. Lies bought life. On September 19, 1692, hysteria reached its bloodiest moment. 81-year-old farmer Giles Corey and his wife Martha were imprisoned. Martha had been condemned,
Giles refused to plead guilty or innocent, knowing that if convicted, his land would be seized. His defiance enraged the court. By English law, those who refused trial faced peine forte et dure, strong and hard punishment. Giles Corey was taken to a field, laid on his back, boards placed over him, and heavy stones piled on top. As the first stone was laid, Giles grimaced, but did not cry out. Judge Hathorne shouted, "Confess, Giles Corey! Admit your pact with the devil and end your pain." Giles looked toward the grey sky and said through clenched teeth, "More. Wait." The executioners hesitated. The judge ordered, "Add more." Another stone. Then another. His ribs cracked. Blood filled his mouth, yet he did not scream. Spectators wept openly. "Do you confess?" "More. Wait." Those were his final words. After 2 days, Giles Corey died beneath the stones. His children buried him in secret that night, as thunder rumbled above Salem. Justice itself lay crushed beneath the weight of those stones. Corey's defiant death marked the peak of madness. Even the accusers began to waver. 16-year-old Mercy Lewis dreamed of Giles's crushed body and woke crying. Remorse had begun, but too late. By late September, rumor spread that even Governor Phipps's own wife, Lady Mary, was being whispered about. The hiatus had reached the colony's highest ranks. Horrified, the governor realized they had unleashed a monster. On October 29, 1692, Phipps dissolved the Oyer and Terminer Court. A new court in Boston would handle the remaining cases, but spectral evidence was now banned. The witch trials abruptly ended. The arrests, the executions, stopped. The wind had changed. In January 1693, the Superior Court in Boston reviewed the Salem cases. The first 5 defendants were acquitted. Most others were released for lack of evidence. 3 were convicted, but Governor Phipps refused to sign their death warrants. By May 1693, the last prisoners were freed. The witch delusion was over. Some had gone grey. Others had lost children to starvation. Salem awoke from its nightmare to find only ruin. Rain Teen had been hanged, 1 pressed to death. At least 5 had died in jail. All had cried their innocence to the very end. Now the town faced its guilt. In November 1692, Cotton Mather published Wonders of the Invisible World, defending the trials. But Boston merchant Robert Califf soon began publishing letters and documents refuting Mather's claims. Debate erupted almost immediately. Were there truly witches, or had innocent people been murdered? On January 14, 1697, a day of fasting and repentance was proclaimed across Massachusetts. Churches held ceremonies to ask God's forgiveness for Salem's victims. In Boston's South Church, Judge Samuel Sewell stood before the congregation and read a trembling confession. He asked pardon from God and from the innocent dead. He wept openly. The congregation sobbed. It was the first step toward healing, but the dead would not return. Years passed. In 1702, the colonial court officially declared the 1692 trials unlawful. In 1706, Ann Putnam Jr., one of the original accusers, sought to join the Salem Church. She was told she must first repent publicly. "I was deluded by Satan. I accused innocent people." She named Rebecca Nurse in particular and begged forgiveness. The crowd listened in silence. Her tears were the tears of a whole village. In 1711, the colony annulled all witchcraft convictions, restored the victims' good names, and granted small compensation to survivors and families. But no apology could erase the pain. Many lived out their days, haunted by guilt. Some changed their names. Others left Salem forever. The name Salem itself had become a mark of shame. Yet the story did not end. It became a warning for future generations. In 1752, Salem Village was officially renamed Danvers to distance itself from its past. But writers and historians would not forget. In the 19th century, Nathaniel Hawthorne confronted his ancestor, Judge Hathorne's guilt, through the Scarlet Letter. In 1953, Arthur Miller revived the trials in The Crucible, comparing them to McCarthyism's political witch hunts. Salem became a symbol of mass hysteria and collective persecution. The trials also helped shape American justice. After Salem, the presumption of innocence and reliance on evidence became cornerstones of law. As historian George Lincoln Burr wrote, "The Salem witchcraft trial was the rock on which the theocracy of New England shattered." Perhaps Salem's greatest legacy is its warning. When fear enslaves reason, even ordinary people can commit extraordinary cruelty. Imagine, one autumn evening, walking through Salem's old cemetery at sunset. The wind stirs the dry leaves. The sky glows orange. Before you stands a simple stone, Rebecca Nurse. A few steps away, John Proctor, Giles Corey. They lie side by side, as if at peace. Yet, they were victims of fear, ignorance, and hatred. Their only crime was living in the wrong time among a merciless people. Looking at those gravestones, one cannot help but wonder, would we have acted differently? Salem's story forces every generation to ask that question. The answer is never easy. Fear is powerful. It blinds and binds. In Salem, fear was so strong that the lies of a few children drove an entire community to madness. Faith, fear, and self-interest. When these three meet, they can create an apocalypse. Salem showed what happens when belief turns to fanaticism, when fear replaces reason, and when personal gain silences conscience. It teaches that if fear is placed on the scales of justice, the innocent will fall into the void. The witches of Salem were never witches at all. They were victims of terror and ignorance. These silent stones keep their memory alive, and history whispers